Let's just talk a little bit about what's happening in Russia. I was looking over, some of the statistics, and if you look at what's happened over the last, well, 2, 3 years, there has been a steady but very gradual acceleration in Russian advances in the amount of territory that they take each month, um, and it's actually, it's very gradual, like over the course of, for example, October through December of last year was very similar to October through December in 2024. But still, there was some acceleration. And I think more importantly, again, as we pointed out before, it was the nature of those advances. They weren't just taking fields, they were actually taking cities, and very important ones like Pokrovsk and Mirnograd and Guliapole and Seversk. So there was, even though there was just a very gradual acceleration, I think if you look at the whole picture, it was, a significant acceleration. And then somebody pointed out, actually, it was Simplicius the thinker, that the statistics from last year are somewhat distorted by Kursk. They took back Kursk, and that added to the total amount of territory, and so it gets somewhat inflated. So there is an acceleration. It's not a rapid, acceleration, but there has been an acceleration. It continues, and actually continued through January. Even though January is generally a slow period, the Russians made significant advances. Much more than they have in past years, and they are continuing to do so. So we do see this steady acceleration, though it's gradual. Still, I think, can be described as incremental. It's clearly the advances are picking up steam, and now we have these. I mentioned the cities or the fortress towns that fell recently, and now we're looking at Konstantinovka and Liman, Krasny Liman. These are places that are going to fall pretty in the near future. And there was even a report that DRG teams, which are basically kind of sabotage and reconnaissance teams, had been spotted. This is according to the Ukrainians, just south, actually in the suburbs, the southern suburbs of Zaporizhzhia. Which if true, and it probably is, again, these are Ukrainian reports. That should be very, very alarming for the Ukrainians. So Zaporizhzhia, again, that's a part of the front that it's slowed down a bit, but the advances are picking up again. And I think we'll see, the siege of Zaporizhzhia will definitely begin sometime this year. And we may also see the siege of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk begin sometime this year, because the advances in those directions aren't slowing down. So there are, significant, those slow, I think it has to be admitted, slow advances on the ground. But another chart that I was looking at was described like the number of missiles and drones that have been fired. And there you see a real rapid acceleration. That it actually begins, it was pretty minimal up until like the end of 2024. Like the last couple of months, and then it started to really take off, and it's just been accelerating at a significant rate. So that's a part of the war that is, where we're seeing, we always talk about the big aero offenses. We haven't seen that on the ground, but in essence, we're seeing it in the air now. It's really happening. It's huge, and we're seeing the consequences. The power grid is being shut down, and then all kinds of damage is being done to what remains of their MIC and their rail network and so on and so forth. And now it's just inevitably this is going to have an impact on what's happening at the front, because logistics are so important to any army. And, it's always said that laymen talk about logistics, or about, battles, but then the experts talk about logistics. They understand in the end, if you don't have the logistics, you're going to lose. And so all of these attacks, again, the rail network is dependent on electricity, and the rail network carries the lion's share of men and material to the front. So that is going to that's going to change things at the front. That's, maybe you don't see it immediately, but you're going to see it over the course of the next couple of months. So I think that will just contribute to this slow acceleration. Maybe it'll become a fast acceleration, on the ground. And then it also has, we've talked about the economic crisis in Ukraine. And, the fact that they're just the Americans are not willing and the Europeans are really unable to meet the financial shortfalls. And those are going to become greater because of these attacks. The fact is that, you shut down the power grid. It's not just, the rail network that ceases to function. And it's not just civilians that, are shivering in the cold. But then factories can't run. People can't go to work. What remains of the economy gets shut down too, a huge part of it. And so then the economic crisis is therefore greatly exacerbated. And so anyway, it looks like 2026 is poised to be, a very grim year for Ukraine. And everybody's been predicting a collapse since 2022. So, I'm reluctant to do it, but it just seems like, a lot of these factors are converging, and I think we will see a real acceleration, again, and it may be not an outright collapse on the battlefield. It's just the weakness of Ukraine, which, it will just become painfully apparent to the point where even, the Western media is going to have to just admit, that Ukraine is losing the war.
How does it end, though? Does it end with, like you said, if there's a collapse, then all of a sudden a rapid advance by the Russians, or does this end with a negotiated settlement, or does it end with Zelensky having to be deposed and a new government in place, or will there be, or does it end with nukes?
Yeah, we don't see any, the thing is, again, the political class in Kiev seems to be just firmly opposed to any kind of real negotiations. And I think we should mention there was an assassination attempt on a Russian general in Moscow, that happened just this morning. We don't know if the guy's going to survive or not. But the thing is, he was the deputy to the head of the negotiation team in Abu Dhabi, the Russian, negotiation team. And he's described as a negotiator himself. And the fact that the Ukrainians would do this, again, it shows just that they seem they're obsessed with avoiding any kind of negotiations. That's what seems clear to me. And there's just no signs of any weakening of that resolve. They didn't even want to be there. I think the Americans bent their arms and forced them to show up, in Abu Dhabi. But clearly, you go ahead and you assassinate a member of the negotiation team or the advisor of the head negotiator. You don't want to be there. You don't want to negotiate. So that's the kind of thing the Israelis do.
I was about to say, right? It sounds like the Israelis.
Right. So there's just no signs of a negotiated settlement. They're still committed to this war. It's both, it's Zelensky and it's the liberal nationalists. It's so much, again, this is like I've described in different ways, over the last several months. This is a regime that is above all composed of information warriors. And for them, it's always about projecting strength and showing resolve, and there just seems to be very little regard for, first of all, for the lives of the men at the front, or for the reality of what's going on there. They're just working hard to hide the reality, and they've had some success, again, because the gains have been incremental. At some point, we'll see. Maybe things will change if the gains are no longer incremental on the Russian side, and the advances go, significantly faster. But right now, we're just not seeing any movement towards negotiations. But there's one exception. I don't know if it's much of an exception. There was the governor of Nikolaev, who's last name is Kim. It sounds Korean, but I don't know. That he actually just made a statement, a public statement that, look, we're losing this war. We have to negotiate. It's going to be painful, but we can't let this continue. But that's just one discordant note. And I don't think he's not there in Kiev. He's out in Nikolaev. And as far as I know, nobody else picked that up.
Well, it sounds like then what needs to be done is that this Zelensky needs to be removed from power. A new regime needs to be put into place.
The problem is that all the people around him they're all of like minds, in part thanks to Zelensky.
Well, this is something that I argued before, and he told me Jim Jatras has the same opinion as well. Is that the right thing to do is to strike the top instead of all these poor guys being sent to the meat grinder in the front line just to be blown up by Russian fab bombs and drones. Take out the leadership, the ones that are sending out these the tasks to round up Ukrainian men off the streets and throw them in the meat grinder. We need to take out the regime that's doing this, the one that has this authoritarian grip over them. Like that was what needs to be done.
Yeah, unfortunately, which is often true when you try to take out the leader, the person who replaces them is really essentially the same. And I think that's what's going to happen. And maybe it's worth a try. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't like the idea. I understand just going after leadership is bad, and it doesn't really because we've seen the Israelis do that so much. But I feel like it's something we're in a different conflict with Russia and Ukraine, where you have a population that does not want to fight, that they are scraping the bottom of the barrel. They have to engage in forced conscription. It's just from a moral standpoint, it's like this has to stop. I mean, or is there some way to give help and resistance to the people there that are, trying to fight this government? And they have nothing. There's nothing left of this country now. It's insane.
I really feel for them. It's just I wish, that's one reason. I don't know. Yeah, this is sort of thing you can make an argument and say, okay, well, Putin is looking for a negotiated settlement. Yeah, there's no question in my mind that he is. He wants to end the war. He'd like to negotiate. He's even willing to make some concessions. I think there really was some kind of concession on Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. At least it's not clear exactly what form it took, but you can just, we'll leave it at that. He made some kind of concessions, and the Russians have said that, we made some concessions. I know a lot of people would be angry, and I kind of understand it, and say that you just can't make any concessions, but this war is so awful, it just, for it to end would be just, it would be such a blessing. It's something that, the only problem is you can't have it end without it really ending, with the same kind of, I think that's the way many people see it, and correctly, that if you have the same kind of people in power, they're hell-bent on starting it again, and it could be even worse later on. And so you just have to go ahead with it. So anyway, I understand why you would want a settlement, but then also I can see the other side, the nationalist side, is that no, you just have to actually even hit harder and just bring this war to an end more quickly. And maybe the truth is, again, I talked about the real acceleration in the air war. The Russians are hitting really, really hard there, and they have brought, and with the result that much of the population is suffering. But the hope is that will bring about, because of the economic effects and the logistical effects, that will bring the war to an end more speedily. Yeah.
Yeah, it's frustrating with the Russia-Ukraine war. We always have this when people will be like, oh my goodness, these guys are pro-Russian, they must be bad people. And I we won't even talk about how this war started and the history of everything. But just thinking about they adopt this position, like this war can end when Putin withdraws his troops. Okay, just be realistic if you have that position. What in your world do you see that happening? In what world do you see things getting better for Ukraine? What is going on? Well, do you if you support Ukraine, you hate Putin with every fiber of your being, fine, but why? Well, what makes you think that telling that we got your back, Ukraine, keep on sending your boys in there, and every day they lose more and more men, more and more territory. Their people are suffering more and more. What's that position? Is that is it just the inability to think beyond this their simple morality where they have, Russia bad, Ukraine good, and then that's it.
Yeah. Right. I would think that position could be a moral position if the Ukrainians clearly were committed to fighting to the very end. They say, we just support that. But they're not. You just see, I think there was a recent statistic that came out, I think, again, from the Ukrainians themselves, that only 25% of the people on the front lines or that are being conscripted now, actually are willing. Are actually willing to go to the front lines. The others don't want to. They're either violently, seized, or or they get the papers and they realize that they have to do it, but they don't want to. It's just like for them, it's 75% don't want to be there. So I'm sorry, you say you support Ukraine. Maybe you support that 25%, but you don't support that 75%. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Well, so many people have died in that war. We forget about it. We forget how many people have died in this pointless war.
It's a different kind of war. Again, the civilian casualties have been unusually low as a percentage of the total, by any time really in the last 150 years or something like that. It's just really, and it is testament to the care that the Russians have taken, because they have the overwhelming firepower. Now, recently there was a huge attack, which is said like it was unprecedented in its scale. The number of missiles was used was off the charts. And the Ukrainians themselves said when it was all over that 3 Ukrainians were injured by falling debris. Now, I mean, that shows you that they're not after civilian targets. I mean, occasionally civilian targets are hit, and but it's really very unusual. And you have to put that down just to the inevitable, malfunction or air defense success or whatever it might be.
Right.
So the Russians have really gone out of their way to avoid civilian casualties. But saying that, it's not like, it's fine. The soldiers, especially unwilling soldiers.
I was about to say, you say civilians, but if 75% are unwilling, like how much of a difference do we have here?
Right.
Obviously, you have a weapon and they're viable targets in that sense. But Samantha's like, just if I was pulled off the street, I don't want to be there. I'm like, okay, now I'm going to get killed by a Russian fat bomb. Like, I don't want to fight them. I don't want to be there. Like, in that sense, in your heart, you're a civilian, Like, so it's like, think about just how many of those men that just never wanted to kill Russians to begin with. They didn't feel this way about this war. They understood the nuances. They wanted a negotiated settlement. Maybe they didn't want, maybe even if they were nationalists, but they realized like, well, we don't want to even deal with the people in the East because they all want to be part of Russia anyway. So let's forget the dome, like whatever it is, like they understood. But they died anyways, and that's a tragedy. It's a huge tragedy.
Yeah, no, it's a huge tragedy. It is, and it shouldn't be minimized. We're talking about, we don't know the exact numbers, but we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. No, we got to take a step back and remind ourselves. So, maybe that's a good place to end it. Just, thoughts and prayers to all the fallen and the families of the fallen, on both sides. It's just awful. It really is. So, okay, let's end it there, Dad. Have a good rest of your day and a great weekend.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.